Well, I rise to speak to One Nation's legislation to end the pandemic of discrimination against Australians who stood for the right to refuse COVID-19 vaccinations. One Nation first introduced similar legislation in 2021. It was when Parliament sittings were being conducted remotely, when the untested jabs were being rolled out while lockdowns were being imposed. It was when bureaucrats and elected representatives deliberately trampled all over the democratic rights of the Australian people. It was when discrimination against those who stood for the right to choose vaccination was at its worst. It was so bad, so pervasive, that the Senate even refused to record One Nation's votes on our own legislation because we had the temerity to do what they should have done from the beginning. One Nation introduced this updated version of the legislation in November 2022. Here we are now debating it in 2024, and discrimination against people who refuse vaccinations continues even today. Australians who stand for the right to choose vaccination are ordinary Australians. They are doctors, nurses and paramedics caring for our health. They are police officers enforcing law and keeping us safe. They are soldiers, sailors and aviators defending our sovereignty. They are people who work alongside us in an office, in a factory, at a mine or a farm or in a shop. They are volunteers helping their communities. They are people in line with us at Centrelink, and they are people sitting next to us in corporate boardrooms. They are people who live next door, down the street, across town and interstate. They are people born here and overseas, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, men and women, adults and children. They are our people. They are our fellow citizens. They are Australians just like you and me, with families and mortgages and worries and hopes and dreams. They are no different from anyone else. The pandemic of discrimination which was unleashed upon our fellow Australians took many forms. They were demonised by not only in our own country but internationally, by elected governments and unelected health bureaucrats, a message amplified by a disturbingly compliant and complacent media. They were physically beaten by police for protesting vaccine mandates and hair-trigger lockdowns, destroying their families, jobs, businesses and the economy. They were attacked in parliaments by their very own elected representatives. Many of these people, thousands upon thousands, lost their jobs and their livelihoods with little to no prospects on the horizon. And many of them are still denied employment in their fields today because they, like me, would not allow that crap to be injected into my body. Yeah. They are still being punished by bureaucracies and government ministers who will never forgive them for not merely submitting to the jabs. These include vital frontline workers in critical fields like law enforcement, public health, the Defence Force and emergency services, all of which are short of skilled workers today. COVID-19 vaccine mandates are still in place in many jurisdictions despite the virus itself becoming endemic in the population. It is nothing less than petty, vindictive discrimination and naked vaccine coercion more than a year after the pandemic was effectively over. However, two particular vaccine mandates are no longer in place. In February this year, the Queensland Supreme Court ruled them illegal on the ground they breached the human rights of the police and nurses on whom they were imposed. That has been One Nation's position on the vaccine mandates all along. The vaccine mandates, discrimination and coercion were not only a fundamental breach of the basic human right to choose, it was a breach of the Australian Constitution. I draw Senators' attention to section 5123A, which I have on numerous occasions, of the Australian Constitution, which says Parliament can make laws with respect to the provision of maternity allowances, widows' pensions, child endowment, unemployment funds, pharmaceutical sickness and hospital benefits, medical and dental services, but not so as to authorise any form of civil conscription. What were the vaccine mandates if not the civil conscription forced upon the Australian people against the coronavirus? That is why the Prime Minister at the time, Scott Morrison, could not mandate it, so he was gutless and he knew he couldn't do it. So that's why he handed it over to the premiers to force it on the people and businesses. He knew he was going against the Constitution. I also note the valedictory speech of former New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet last week. Perrottet became Premier at the height of the pandemic in October 2021. In his speech last week he said, "If the impact of vaccines on transmission was limited at best, as is now mostly accepted, the law should have left more room for respect of freedom. Vaccines saved lives, but ultimately mandates were wrong. People's personal choices shouldn't have cost them their jobs. When I became Premier, we removed vaccine mandates, or the ones we actually could, but this should have happened faster. If a pandemic comes again, we need to get a better balance encouraging people to take action whilst at the same time protecting people's fundamental liberty. I'd have a lot more respect for the man if he had articulated and upheld their basic democratic principles when he had the power to do so. A mandate is still in place for New South Wales health workers, and those firefighters who refuse to be jabbed are still being refused to work even now, long after their counterparts have not been forced to have the jab since December 2021. And I believe the same is happening in Victoria with the firefighters there, unless things have changed. I can hear the bureaucrats and the politically elected minions saying, "Those shall not disobey us. Do as you are told." It was the unelected bureaucrats driving the pandemic response that trampled our human rights, not elected officials. This was coordinated and orchestrated on a global scale. The rush COVID-19 vaccines, which cost Australian taxpayers an eye-watering, get this one, $18 billion to buy, not only proved ineffective in preventing infection and transmission. $18 million that it cost us to strip people of their human rights, force them to have a vaccine against their will. $18 billion. How much of that went back over to Japan or to these big pharmaceutical companies that pushed this? A vaccine that was not tried, tested, proven, nothing. The evidence is very clear now. These untried and untested medicines caused immense harm to many thousands of Australians and millions across the world. The Therapeutic Goods Administration reported more than 144,000 adverse reactions in Australia, an astronomical amount compared to other vaccines, and the evidence is clear there were a great deal more. More experts are now speaking up about the lifelong impact on human health of these experimental jabs. Young men across the world are experiencing heart problems, mainly with myocarditis and pericarditis. Women's menstrual cycles are being disrupted. Not only that, is that we have more miscarriages, birth defects that are happening in our society, but no one wants to own up to anything, do they? There are far fewer kidney transplant procedures taking place due to sudden shortage of healthy kidneys. And there is the unexplained spike in deaths in Australia and around the world that were not related to getting the virus. Then on top of that, I was also informed that we have a rise now in cancer. Cancer is now on the rise and unknown. So cancers that we have probably weren't very common, they're on the rise as well. So these people that have had this vaccine, I'm sorry to tell you, you've compromised your body. You have compromised your health. And one cardiologist said, by having the jab, you've compromised your heart 100%. So this is what the government has done to you. This is what the bureaucrats have done to you. You led like sheep to the slaughter. You were led like sheep to the slaughter over having this vaccination against your will. If you wanted to have the vaccine, that was your choice. But when people were forced and they lost their jobs because they had to have the vaccine, that's what I'm angry about. That's what needs to be exposed here. People's liberty and their rights were stripped from them. Hear, hear. I said at the beginning of the vaccine rollout that I would not put that shit into my body. So did many other Australians, but they had no choice. It turns out they were definitely onto something. Refusing the mandates may have saved their life. Bureaucrats in Australia have been indemnified from the consequences of imposing these harmful mandates. That needs to be reversed. Australians are demanding accountability for being forced to accept vaccinations proven to be harmful to their health. We must unpack the entire Australian response to the pandemic. We must see the health advice which led to these mandates and who provided it. We must act before the World Health Organisation's proposed pandemic treaty is imposed on the world. The only way to do this is by following One Nation's policy to establish a comprehensive Royal Commission into the management of the COVID-19 pandemic by all Australian governments. But they won't do it. They won't do it because at the time we had a Liberal National Party government, and then we also had state Labor governments. So you see, they won't want to put a noose around their own neck. That's why this Royal Commission will never happen, because you know you're both guilty of it. But Christ's sake, the people want answers. But the people want someone to stand up and say, I got it wrong. Dominic Perrottet did it, but he's out of the office now. But at least he was edging towards it. Why can't we have the same backbone from some of the members in this parliament and our leaders of this nation, premiers, whoever, and the former Prime Minister? Please be upfront with the Australian people. If we're not upfront now, when is the next time that you are going to force this on the Australian people? When is the next time that you're going to listen to health officials from somewhere around the world saying, oh, you've got to force this on the people? Until we know how to deal with this properly, we're not going to move forward with this, and the people are demanding answers. The mental illness that it has left with people is unbelievable. The health issues that people have, it's numerous health issues. I'm pulled up usually all the time that people now have health issues. They had the vaccine. I said, don't have any more. You couldn't see your loved ones, even the people in aged care homes. Unless you had the vaccine, you couldn't see your people in aged care. They were dying because they were distraught, because they couldn't see their family. They didn't know what was happening. How many people in good health actually have keeled over dead in their 40s and 50s due to heart failure? How many? How many have died? You know, former Olympians that I've heard of? Other people in good health, but all of a sudden died from heart attacks. Isn't it amazing? But we didn't do that. A lot of these people died, no autopsies done. It was all hidden, buried. We don't want to tell people. Even the inquiry that we had, that One Nation got up and had Pfizer and Moderna there, who said, oh no, no one was forced. What a load of rubbish. And why did the government indemnify these pharmaceutical companies? Why were they indemnified? Here we were giving vaccination to people that wasn't tried, tested and proven. I'll keep saying that. It was only about 10 months prior to that. Any vaccinations that are given to people usually goes through a period of 8, maybe 10, 18 years that needs to be properly tested. And yet this was not properly tested. A batch of this stuff actually killed people. Killed people. Every batch that was manufactured was not tested. That is the problem. I am going to keep going on and on and on about this until I'm a pain in your backside, which I don't care, until the people get answers and the people get a Royal Commission into this. I may not have the balance of power this time around, but I hope that people vote for One Nation in the next election, that we get the balance of power, because we will use that balance of power to force a Royal Commission for the people to have their say. And that is what is dearly needed. One Nation is the only party that's fighting for this, and I take my hat off to some of those, Rennick and Antic, Senator Rennick, Senator Antic and Senator Canavan, who has also stood up for this. There are very few of us here, and Senator Babet is also standing up for this. I take my hat off to them, and I respect them for standing up on their values and principles, because they know it's wrong. So you, the people, we're fighting for you. But the rest of these people in this place, they couldn't give a damn about you or your future or your health or nothing. And you're going to have to suffer until you throw them out at the next election.